Hi everyone, thanks for joining me once again for another set of stories right here on Thailand Bound. If you haven't been here before, my name's Peter and I'm going to be reading out 3 viewer stories. We're on quite a bit of a marathon today. It's a little bit longer because the third of the 3 stories is quite long. Just before I get into these, and very quickly, one of the questions I get asked more than any other question when I release these stories, there'll be guys who realise a story was released, say, 10 minutes ago on a Saturday morning, but there's already 20 comments and they write to me and say, how can this be? These comments can't be genuine because you've literally just released this video 10 minutes ago and you've got 20 comments. Well, the reason for that is very simple, is I give there's an early release to members. I've got nearly 200 members now, and I release the upload that goes out on a Saturday for everybody else. I release it's early access for members on a Tuesday, so they get to listen to the stories on a Tuesday, about 4 days before everybody else, and that's why a lot of those members leave comments, and so when I release it to everybody else on a Saturday, there's already maybe 10, 20, 30 comments, and it can be quite confusing. So I hope I've cleared that one up. If you have any other questions, I'm always here to answer them. Right, let's get into the first of 3 stories today.
สวัสดีค่ะ
Now, this first story, you might have think I've heard this before. You haven't. I haven't read it out. But what it is, a couple of weeks ago, I read the first part of this story because I thought it was very relevant and quite clever what the guy said. And I said I'd read out the whole story the following Saturday, which I'm now doing. So if it sounds familiar, it's probably because you were in my live stream. That was the one I did unscheduled, a Sunday afternoon. Okay. I enjoy listening to your channel and hearing all the stories, the good, the bad, and the very ugly. People often criticise relationships between Western men and Thai women as being transactional rather than based on true feelings. But I believe that for a certain group of men at a certain point in their lives, a transactional relationship with a Thai woman will be one of the best decisions they will ever make. When you're in your 20s, 30s, or even early 40s, you should have sufficient charm, wit, intelligence, and good looks to attract a mate without having to hand over any cash. But when you are in your 50s or 60s, you're much less likely to be a babe magnet, and that's when a transactional relationship with a Thai girl may be the right solution for you. Oh, and when the Thai girl stops calling you handsome man and starts calling you papa, then a transactional relationship is most definitely all you're going to get. My situation was boringly similar to that of many other men coming to Thailand. I had been married to a cancer surgeon for over 20 years. As we had similar earnings, this clearly wasn't a transactional relationship. For most of this time, I had to travel abroad every week for my job. When I reached 50, I decided to take early retirement and spend more time with my family as well as starting a new career. Unfortunately, my family didn't want to spend more time with me and I got divorced about a year later. I then did the sort of things one often does, went trekking in the Himalayas, did a cycling trip around parts of Thailand, Cambodia and Vietnam, and did a 1-week diving course in Pattaya. I did try the dating scene in my own country, but I either met women with a flock of brats in tow or with a lorry load of emotional issues, or both. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life looking after someone else's ghastly offspring or solving someone else's emotional hang-ups. We all want different things in life. Some of us like the freedom of living alone, others prefer some form of company. I had the choice, either spend the rest of my life alone rattling around a large house or find someone to share my life with. I know they say that with property you should buy as it usually goes up in value over time, but with women you should rent as their value goes down over time. But I decided I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone, so I went back to Pattaya and started interviewing girls for the role as my future partner. At first, there were quite a few girls who clearly weren't appropriate, often due to immaturity, greed, mainly for gold, which they would no doubt take to a pawn shop the moment their Westerner left Thailand, or a tendency to explode at inappropriate moments. But eventually, I found a girl I liked. She stood out because in addition to working in a bar, she was studying English and computers at a local government college. I admire people who try to improve their lives, even when they are in difficult financial circumstances. She was 29 and I was just over 50 when we met. That seems to me like a reasonable age difference. Clearly, it would have ended in tears if I had chosen a 20-year-old who wanted to party 24/7. Nowadays, I would never date a bar girl. I would use one of the main dating sites to find female company. But back then, there weren't so many dating sites. While waiting to get a marriage visa for her to visit me in my home country, I sent her on a couple of courses. One was hairdressing and another 1-year course at a hospital for the elderly in Bangkok so she could get some qualifications. Having had to leave school early to sell food at a market, she was delighted to have some educational qualifications. I think we get on well. We have been together for about 20 years. We travel a lot, go skiing and cycling, play tennis and lead quite full lives. When we're at home, she works in a care home. Although she only earns the minimum wage, about £10, €12, $12 an hour, in a month she gets the equivalent of about 60,000 baht. Given that I pay our household expenses, this has allowed her to save enough money to build a house for her family, buy some more land, buy a family car, and so on. We have both always been clear that this was a transactional relationship. I provide her with an agreed allowance to put her brother through university, and yes, it was her brother, not her Thai boyfriend, and to provide for her 2 sisters and their children, and she gets the opportunity to have a financially secure life in the West. Incidentally, after her brother finished university, he got a good job with the Thai government, and hopefully her nephews will also go to university, thus completely transforming the family's fortunes, turning them from being impoverished rice farmers to educated middle-class Thais. A 50 to 60-year-old Westerner is most probably a fool if they believe they will find genuine love with a Thai woman 10 to 20 years younger than themselves. But in my humble opinion, there is nothing wrong or shameful in having a transactional relationship with a Thai woman which benefits you both. In fact, providing you put enough time and effort into finding the right Thai girl and providing you agree the financial terms of the relationship and make it clear there will be no exceptions, whatever real or imaginary disasters happen to her family, so she must take responsibility for saving her own money to cope with unexpected expenses. I would highly recommend going into the kind of transactional relationship I choose. It has made my life a lot more fun and could do the same for you. So a couple of points I'd like to raise on this story. It's a very, very good story and I liked it. But there's one point I didn't agree with him on. In the story, he says somebody must be, I can't remember the exact words and I've just read it. That's my memory these days. He said, but if you believe you can have a successful relationship with a woman 10 to 20 years younger than you, then you're dreaming or something similar, he said, didn't he? I don't agree with that because I know a lot of guys who have got Thai wives and girlfriends who are 10, 15 and even, 18 years younger than them, and they have very, very successful lives. So I do agree the part where he says if, a 60-year-old guy, for instance, tried to make a 20-year-old girl a partner. I mean, what are they going to talk about? K-pop or his old age pension? It's going to be a difficult one, isn't it? But he makes some valid points. Now, if you've been to Thailand and you know how it works, or even the Far East, you would have absorbed this story for what it is and kind of agreed with parts of it. But, if there's any criticism in the comments on this one, I'm guessing it's going to be from people who haven't been to Thailand and just say things like, why would you marry I can't say the word on YouTube, but it begins with a P. Why would you marry one of them? It's very difficult for people who have never been here to understand things like that. I'm getting tongue twisted now because I'm trying to explain it and keep within YouTube's rules. So I think the best thing is that I move on to story number 2. I am still enjoying your stories and sent one a long time ago, though I'm still working and don't have a lot of spare time. My story was not a crash and burn story, as I am still happily married in Thailand. This story is about my sister-in-law. She's a real piece of work and she's a working girl. It shows you how people can change. When I first met my sister-in-law, maybe 16 years ago, she was a young girl working in a factory in Chonburi. She was married and pregnant with her second kid. We live in a small village in Chonburi of maybe 200 to 300 people, around 1.5 hours from Pattaya. I was the only Farang in the village and lived with the Thai family for 9 years until my wife and I built our own house. I met my wife on a holiday in Samui. She was from Chonburi, not from Isan or the north. 17 years later, we are still going strong. My wife is the person who holds the family together, cooking, working at her own coffee shop and taking care of everyone. It's lucky my wife is like that, as her sister is a headache. My wife has a brother and a younger sister who both work, but back to the sister-in-law. After she had her baby, she kicked her husband out. Her husband still worked 6 days a week, but the money was not enough for her, even though she took all of his money. He was a good man and I liked him. You can imagine what she decided to do to make money, and still does at the ripe old age of 45. Her cousin was working in a bar in Chawang and mentioned all the money she made. At around 3 months old, her younger son became our surrogate son and still is. I don't mind, as he's a good kid and well behaved. My wife brought him up well, and he is now 15 years old. My wife and I visited Samui a couple of times, and she took to her new profession like a duck to water. Let's just say she was not a fussy girl, but she was a greedy girl for sure, greedy for a lot of money. I had a good reputation in the village. I was always polite and never drunk or showed affection in public, as my wife had taught me that it was only acceptable behind closed doors. Her dad was a monk, although her mum was a bit of a pain and still is. Then the first Farang arrived with her sister, who immediately primed me by saying, "Don't say this and you can't say that," and claimed she had only worked in the bar for a week, not the 3 years she really had worked there. I had a beer with a guy who was from England, and I had to laugh at all the lies she told him. He was completely hooked. I just sat there and nodded at all her lies, trying to spend as little time as possible at the family home so I did not get involved with her BS. I don't like to see someone who has worked hard to make money get fleeced. In the late afternoon, I would usually go to the village shop to sit with the locals and have some conversation, as there are no pubs where I live. The English guy, getting bored, would come to see me since he had no Thai company. He was a real monger and did not know how to behave in the village. I was embarrassed, my wife was embarrassed, but the sister-in-law did not care. She was on a paycheck, and you can imagine the local Thais looking on. The English guy then said he was setting up a mushroom farm and was going to settle in the village, and he asked if I would like to go 50-50, to which I refused immediately. I told him that my wife and I have jobs. I was on the rigs and she had her coffee business. He obviously overpaid for a half a rai of land next to the family house, built the mushroom sheds and bought all the equipment. He was maybe down about 700k in baht. The Englishman then went home because he needed more money. My sister-in-law worked on the mushroom farm for maybe 2 weeks. She would post pictures on Facebook and accept her monthly allowance. Within a couple of months, the mushroom equipment was sold, the land was also sold, and she blocked him on social media. I never saw him again. Then came the Norwegian, who was married to a Thai who lived with him in Norway. Now, at around 41, my sister-in-law was getting a bit long in the tooth for Samui, so she moved to Cha'am. She is a good-looking girl, but she has a heart of stone. She only smiles when there is a mention of money. I liked the Norwegian man, who was older than me, but I expected him to be street smart, especially with a Thai wife in Norway. He had been all over Thailand, but decided Cha'am was good for him due to the Scandinavian community there. With his wife still in Norway, he required some local entertainment, so he moved her into his house, and when his Thai family came to visit, he would say she was the cleaner. Good idea. We have a friend in Hua Hin, so on our visits we would drop into Cha'am and see them. She would still go to the bar when he was back in Norway for extra income. She loved older men as they were easily influenced with aerobics. The Norwegian eventually came to the village, and the half rai of land was then reacquired next to the family house. Not really just rented, but the Norwegian did not know this. It was now going to be a chicken farm, as the mushroom sheds could be adapted. He then had to buy 1,000 chickens and all of the feed and other items. I was asked to join them again and invest, but I said no, as I knew what was going on. Within a month, guess what? The chickens and the feed were sold, and since the land was only rented, that money went straight into her pocket. I wanted to let the Norwegian know what was going on. He was a good man, but I couldn't, as I was now part of the Thai family. I just kept quiet and hoped he would find her out, and he did. Eventually, with all the cash requests, the Norwegian could not support her anymore. He was married in Norway and could not hide the constant payments. He was down around 500,000 baht and he wised up. There were many men in between, but the next one I remember was a Swedish guy. I work overseas, so I probably missed a few. Back in Chatham, she had again captured another. The next victim was a very old Swedish man, maybe in his mid-70s. He had money, transport, and was keen on drinking. I like a drink and have a beer every day, but he could really drink. Guess what? He came to the village. Now in the village, we wear shorts and a t-shirt. When the sister-in-law arrived, she looked like mutton dressed as lamb. Short skirts and low top are not a thing here, especially with her kids running around. Supposedly, this guy liked her to dress this way. He was taken to my house, which was a bit more comfortable than the family house, and he had also brought a wingman, also a Swedish guy, who was a nice man. We sat outside and spoke a little. His English was pretty poor, and his Thai was basically nothing. Having said that my Swedish was non-existent, I was polite, but it was not my most interesting evening. I also laughed at the sister-in-law acting like a bar girl in the village, which was a bit embarrassing for both me and my wife. My wife, being the polite host, cooked some Thai food. I was again primed on what to say and not to say, and I was getting fed up with this. After a few beers, I told the sister-in-law to go home and get changed as it was not suitable for the village, and she did. After a very boring evening with the older Swedish guys, I heard that he was buying land and chickens. He gave his donation and he went back to where he had come from with his friend and the sister-in-law. The chickens are still there. My wife now takes care of the coffee shop, the chickens and her family. Her sister sends her 1,000 baht a month, not enough. Having taken care of my nephew since he was 3 months old, I don't mind as he's a good kid. My sister-in-law then moved in with the Swedish man. As I said before, he was a big drinker in his mid-70s. The next time he came to the village, he went on a big session. I had told my wife not to bring him over as he was a boring guy, only wanting to drink. While in our village, he became incontinent and my wife never told me until I asked her why she was buying Pampers at Lotus. I must admit I had to laugh. My sister-in-law had to take care of him for 2 weeks until he could control himself, and I laughed again. They eventually made it back to home and he offered her 25,000 a month to look after him and also supply aerobics if required. She said it was not enough and told him she would still need to work as a cashier in her bar in Chatham, to which he agreed. She tells him that she only works as a cashier and for lady drinks. She is obviously still working and changing Pampers during the day. Now, after a conversation with my wife, they don't talk. My wife told her that at 45 years old, it's time to come back and spend time with her kids. Even after all the money she has scammed, she needs more and has spent what she had. My wife and I still take care of her kids, feed them and make sure they have clean clothes to go to school. It never fails to mystify me just how ruthless some of these bar girls can be. He's telling a few stories of guys he's seen come to the village, but also it mystifies me why these guys hand over such huge amounts of cash. I guess it's a dream of being able to stay in Thailand. You come here on holiday quite a few times. You have an idea that the girl puts in your head about a mushroom farm or a chicken farm. You do the numbers and you think, okay, it's going to wipe out my savings, but I can stay in the land of smiles forever and I'll be in heaven most of the time, probably all the time. No, most of the time, your money just gets stolen by a girl and she moves on to his, as he quite rightly said, her next victim. Right, this third story is a little bit longer, so we're going to run over time probably by about 5-10 minutes today. So I'm going to just get straight into it. And don't forget, guys, as always, if you're sitting on a story and you're wondering whether you should send it in or not, I always make it anonymous. I change the names. People won't know it's you. And you too can enjoy your story read out right here on Thailand Bound. Right, let's jump into the third and final story of the day. My name is Michael and I had always had Thailand on my bucket list. I have a friend from university who lives in Thailand and another very good friend who is a frequent visitor to the land of smiles. I discovered your channel during COVID-19 lockdown and have listened ever since. I love the Saturday morning stories and eagerly anticipate hearing about other people's experiences. I'm in my mid-50s, have a good salary and like to keep myself in shape. I am by no means rich, but I am comfortable financially. One night, while out with my friend Gary, I complained about spending all my time either at work or alone at home, and he invited me to join him on his next trip to Thailand, saying, "You will love it," with a glint in his eye. A bit about Gary. He is a typical Thailand visitor in many ways. He lost his wife in his early 50s and took it very badly, suffering from depression and struggling to overcome his loss. A couple of years passed and he was still struggling until a friend suggested he visit Pattaya. That first visit changed him entirely. He was hooked on Thailand, especially Pattaya. Since then, Gary has visited Thailand 3 times a year, and I have listened intensely to his stories, which only deepened my desire to visit. Watching your YouTube videos about Thailand further convinced me that I had to experience the land of smiles. Gary became very close to a Thai girl called Ploy. He talked about her constantly and visited her repeatedly. He was smitten, and after one trip he returned to tell me they were planning a future together with plans to buy a small business and for him to move to Thailand. He was deeply in love and devoted all his time to saving money for his next trip. However, one visit he returned home broken-hearted because Ploy had ended the relationship, shattering all of his hopes and dreams of a new life with her. Gary made a few more trips to Thailand, and after one visit he returned excitedly to tell me he had met another girl named Dao, showing me pictures of a very pretty Thai lady. I remarked that she looked very young, but he assured me that although she was nearly 50, she only looked in her 30s. Indeed, Thai women seem to age gracefully. Gary is very happy now, and they are planning a future together, which surprised me given what had happened with Ploy. Soon after, Gary and I set our travel dates and booked my first trip to Thailand. In the months between booking and departure, I binged on YouTube videos featuring travel tips and advice for visiting Thailand. I recall that on the long flight from the UK to Bangkok, Gary talked endlessly about his experiences, mentioning Ploy repeatedly and describing how she broke his heart. I must admit that I was conscious of feeling like a spare part spending my holiday with a couple, but he assured me that Dao would make me feel welcome upon arrival. Gary arranged for us to be picked up by a friend who does airport runs, and I couldn't believe my eyes. When I saw our driver, a stunningly beautiful lady, I remembered walking out of the airport terminal and being met by an overwhelming wall of heat. My first thought was that I was in for 2 weeks of torture under the relentless sun. Thankfully, we were soon on our way to Pattaya in an air-conditioned car. Arriving in Pattaya and witnessing its hustle and bustle for the first time was exhilarating. We both checked into our apartments and Gary told me he was off to meet Dal and bring her back to their place. I couldn't believe how nice the apartments were for the money I paid. Pattaya is so cheap. I told Gary that it was fine and that I would see him in the evening. As I was tired and wanted to sleep, after a few hours of sleep, I woke up, showered and looked out from my balcony where I could see a bar I recognised from YouTube videos just outside. I decided to go for my first beer in Thailand on my own, not wanting to disturb Gary and Dal. The bar was nearby and despite the heat, I went in. I was greeted by a beautiful lady and I ordered a cold beer and finally relaxed. I was here in the land of smiles with my bucket list ticked off. The young lady in the bar bought my beer and was very friendly and flirty. I couldn't stop looking at her. She was gorgeous. I spent most of the early evening there, and each time she came over, grew increasingly flirtatious, getting physically closer to me. Despite feeling a bit tipsy from jet lag and tiredness, I didn't want to leave. Her rubbing my arm and speaking so intimately that I felt her lips brush by my face was intoxicating. She asked me numerous questions about how long I was staying in Thailand and how many times I had been here before. I instantly recalled some advice. Never tell a lady it's your first time. But thinking I knew the game, I admitted it was my first visit, which turned out to be a mistake because a couple of beers later, I was completely smitten with her. She explained that she was a hostess and couldn't be bar fined, but could make arrangements after work if I wanted to meet her. I explained that I was with a friend and his Thai girlfriend and that I would return later to see her again. When I left, she said she hoped to see me again and I promised I would return that night. By then it was dark and I finally saw Pattaya properly for the first time, with streets lined with bars and women calling out in deep voices, "Hello, where are you going, handsome man?" Later I called into Gary's apartment and met Dao for the very first time. She was very pretty, friendly and spoke decent English, laughing when I told her about my afternoon's drinks and the girl I met, remarking that such encounters were normal in Pattaya. That night we all arranged to meet for food and a few beers, and I treated them. Although I felt like a spare part tagging along with a couple, we wandered around until we found a bar with a great live band. Inside, a lady took my hand and led me to a seat, instantly sensing I was on my own. Although she was attractive, her overbearing nature made me wish she would leave me alone. I noticed another bar girl smiling at me as if she could see my frustration, and I wished it were her who was paying me attention. I told Gary I wanted to leave because the first bar girl was starting to annoy me. Eventually, Dao told the first girl in the Thai that we were leaving to meet friends as we departed. Eventually, Dal told the first girl in Thai that we were leaving to meet friends, and as we departed, the other girl smiled and waved clearly, understanding my predicament. We then went to another bar where an older but beautiful woman sat next to me. She was pleasant, spoke good English, and had an amazing figure. She flirted with me and talked with Dal, who laughed with her, making me suspect that they knew each other. Gary explained that the lady was a freelancer, which all made sense. I enjoyed the night, but all I wanted was to return to the bar from my earlier visit, as I was infatuated with the girl I had met. I eventually found the bar, and after settling into a seat, the girl came over and explained, "Oh my God, you came back," with a big smile on her face, which made me very happy. However, when Gary and Dal joined me at my table and I introduced them to my new friend, the mood suddenly shifted. Gary greeted the girl and she looked very uncomfortable and walked away. Gary seemed upset, and when I asked him what was wrong, he revealed that the girl was Ploy, the one who had broken his heart. I was stunned that all the girls in Pattaya I had encountered my friend's ex. Dal demanded an explanation, and the night ended with her feeling jealous and angry, Gary upset, and me devastated. We left, went to another bar for one more drink, and then called it a night. What a disaster. The next few days were odd. I avoided alcohol while Gary and Dal seemed fine, and we never visited that bar again. The following day, Dal told me that a friend of hers wanted to meet me, showing pictures of a stunning woman and giving me her phone number. Gary mentioned that her friend was a freelancer who wanted to discuss money in exchange for spending my holiday with me. I found it strange and declined, thinking it odd that she would only spend time with me if the money was right. That's Pattaya, I suppose. I then contacted my friend who lives in Thailand and spent a couple of days with him to give Gary and Dal some space, enjoying meals out, shopping at Terminal 21 and spending time on the beach at Jomtien. After returning home from a day on the beach with my friend, I went back to Gary's apartment and discovered a Thai lady there. Dao explained that she was one of her friends in Pattaya looking for work. Petite, very pretty and quite shy. She was cooking a meal with other ladies and invited me to join them. But since I had just eaten, I declined, mentioning I was having an early night as we were travelling to Koh Samet the next day. When Gary and I were planning our trip, he recommended Koh Samet, which looked amazing, so we booked separate apartments for a few days. The next day, I got up early, packed a small bag for the trip, and Gary came to my apartment to say that Dal's friend would be joining us in Koh Samet and staying in their apartment on the sofa. Gary had arranged for the same lady who picked us up from the airport to take us to the ferry terminal for Koh Samet. When we arrived, we walked to our apartments located just a short distance from the pier. After checking in and receiving our keys, I opened my door and found the apartment to be great. A few minutes later, Gary knocked on my door to ask if Dal's friend could stay with me since there were no sofas in the apartment. Although I was initially resistant, I offered to pay for her own apartment because the situation felt awkward. But the girl refused and said she would sleep on my floor, which I couldn't allow. So reluctantly, I let her stay in my room, even though I didn't even know her name. Gary apologized and explained that Dao had invited her, thinking she would stay in their room. The island was stunning. Our apartments were only a couple of meters from the beach, and I was amazed at the beauty of the place. We had a meal and sat on the beach. It was idyllic. However, when the night came, I felt awkward sharing a bed with someone I had just met, so to avoid discomfort, we slept on opposite sides of the bed. The girl's name was Nid. She didn't speak English, so we could hardly communicate, only through a translation app. Despite being 47, she looked about 32. She told me that she ran a restaurant until it went bust during COVID, and she had learned to give massages to make money, mainly for Thai people, mostly women, in her non-tourist area, though she tried Pattaya because she could earn more there. She mentioned that she was leaving Pattaya because she found it scary and didn't like the work practices, though who knows if that was entirely true. The next day, I went for an early walk on the beach and upon returning, found everyone awake. Gary asked me how my night had been. I admitted it felt awkward and uncomfortable sharing with a stranger. He laughed and said, "This is Thailand, not the UK. It is normal," even joking that there might be a YouTube video about me, the shyest guy in Pattaya. That day was wonderful. We swam in the sea, ate meals together, and Nid really opened up. Perhaps she felt awkward as I did at first, but as we spent time together on the beach and in the sea, she became loving and close to me. After the beach, we returned to the apartment and I went in for a shower to wash off the salt water. I was alerted by the sound of the door opening when Nid walked in with a big smile and joined me. Later, we returned to the main room and even had some aerobics a few times. Wonderful. She mentioned that she thought I didn't like her, which is why she had been quiet. That night, we went out for a meal and Gary teased me about being shy. I explained what happened and remarked, "About time." One day in Koh Samet, Gary took us for a walk through lanes and side streets until we found some apartments where he said he and Ploy had once stayed. Cue another angry outburst from Dao and hours of silence as she complained that Thai girls are naturally jealous and huffy. Back in Pattaya the next day, Nid came to my room and began hanging up her clothes, although I hadn't asked her to stay with me. I didn't mind because she was pleasant company. For the next week, she was the perfect holiday girlfriend. We did everything together, meals, shopping and beach outings, and we became inseparable. In a shopping mall one day, I asked if she had seen anything she liked, and when she mentioned that clothes were cheaper in a market, we went there. She got a couple of items that cost next to nothing, which pleasantly surprised me as I had expected her to go for expensive items. One day, a friend based in Thailand messaged me saying he had a day off and invited me out for food, beach and beers. I met him and had a great time, but when I returned, Gary, Dao and Nid were in Gary's apartment cooking a meal and having drinks, having decided on a night in. I said I wanted to go out since I didn't want to spend the night in the apartment. So the plan was for Nid to stay with Gary and Dao while I took the key with me, since the key fob opened the lift and I would be locked out without it. At the last minute, Nid decided to stay in my apartment. I was okay with that, but since I had the key, she couldn't leave the room. When I left, Nid was sitting in front of the TV, looking very happy, and I told her about the bar I was planned to go to. I wanted to see a live band. Once outside, I changed my mind and went to a bar in the opposite direction, the same bar where I had been on my first night, recalling the bar girl who had been a bit of a pest. I remembered her smiling at me clearly, noticing my stress, and she waved me over, so I invited her to join me. Although she couldn't speak English, I chatted with her through a translation app until the Mama-san joined us. The Mama-san explained that the girl was new to the bars and ineffective because she couldn't speak English, saying that she had been in Pattaya for 3 weeks and no one had shown any interest in her. I assured her it was fine, bought them several drinks for both of them, and when the Mama-san asked if I was going to bar find the girl, I replied that I couldn't since I had someone staying in my room. The Mama-san then asked if I could take her another night because she hadn't been bar fined yet. There I was sitting drunk with a bar girl and watching a band when I noticed Nid coming over to me. She shouted at me in Thai, ran out of the bar and looked as though she was crying. The bar girl asked me who she was and I admitted I didn't know. Oops. I finished my drink and headed back to my apartment, questioning how Nid had known where to find me. As I thought I had the key, my mind raced as I approached the apartment. Uncertain of what I would find, and when I got back, Nid was already there. I was furious, asking her if she had left my apartment open, and we argued for a bit. I insisted that I was only talking to somebody and doing nothing wrong. She explained that she had asked Dal to look after my room when she went to the 7-Eleven, which was right beside the apartment block and nowhere near where she had found me, and then she started to cry and apologised. I went back to the bar, got very drunk, and when I returned, Nid was asleep on the couch in the living room. I went to the bed drunk and expecting trouble the next day. The following day, Gary told me that Nid had asked them to watch my room and had borrowed his key fob to operate the lift. She said she needed something from the shop, but Gary suspected she had been roaming the streets looking for me. When I woke up, Nid was lying beside me and smiling. However, that day, she packed up and left Pattaya to head home near Bangkok. I walked with her to the bus station and waved her off, feeling terrible about what I'd done to that lovely girl. I returned to the apartment and spent the day nursing a hangover and a feeling of guilt, even though I hadn't really done anything to warrant it. Later that day, Gary and Dal came to my room. Dal said that Nid was upset but understood that Western men come to Pattaya for fun with bar girls. I explained that I was only talking to someone and watching a band, and Dal laughed when I mentioned that I had paid for drinks for a girl and the mama-san. She asked if I had wanted Nid to go, and I said no. She smiled and said she would sort something out. A couple of hours later, Nid was outside the hotel back from Bangkok, and I had to collect her because she couldn't get in without a fob. She was so happy to be back, and we had an amazing time together for the rest of my holiday. One day, I took her shopping and offered to buy her a gift, but she refused, saying there was nothing she needed. However, when we were in the mall, I bought her a couple of items, a top and a top and short set, both in the same size, though one top fitted while the other one was too small. We returned them and asked for a bigger size. The lady in the mall said there were no larger sizes in stock and offered me another top, which made me happy, though Nid looked furious. She started arguing with the lady and eventually grabbed the shorts and stormed away, explaining that the lady had tried to rip me off by giving us only a top in exchange for a returned top and shorts. She was protecting me, even though I wasn't upset. When my holiday came to an end, it was so hard to say goodbye. Nid looked very sad. She had never asked me for money, but on the last day I gave her 10,000 baht after insisting, and she accepted it with tears in her eyes. When we got home, Dal told Gary that Nid cried for the rest of the day because I had left. Looking back, I realised that I thought I was prepared for Pattaya, but I wasn't. Perhaps I shouldn't have taken more advantage of the many available women, but I had the company of a loving, pretty woman who made my time in Thailand fantastic. I have stayed in touch with Nid. At first, we messaged each other frequently, but now it is just the occasional message, as I didn't want to start a long-distance relationship with someone 6,000 miles away, and Nid has never asked me for money. Out of all the women in Pattaya, I still find it crazy that the first girl I encountered was my friend's ex. An unbelievable coincidence. Will I go back? Definitely. They say that Thailand is addictive, and I can certainly see why. Great story there, but it's obvious to me, playing devil's advocate, Nid was obviously a freelancer, wasn't she? Because, she's just a normal girl. She's not going to come to the island and say, can I sleep with you? And she took the money at the end of the day, right? Not trying to be horrible. I'm just saying. The other thing was the other girl that he met at the bar, when the mama-san came across and said, oh, she's had no takers, nobody's interested because she doesn't speak English. Well, if you've been here before, she's a good-looking girl. She doesn't even need to speak English. She doesn't even need to speak. As long as she understands a bit of sign language, like come this way, she'd have been taken out of the bar. It sounded like a typical kind of setup with the mama-san and the girl trying to play on somebody, maybe he's a little bit naive on his first trip or something like that. But I certainly don't believe the girl had never been out with anybody else. But that's just me. Okay, guys, thanks for listening again. There'll be more news stories, hopefully news stories, if you keep sending them in, that is. I look forward to receiving your stories. But for now, thanks for listening to this exceptionally long upload this week. I hope you'll be back for more next week. Until then, have a great week as always, and I'll catch you next week.